Let me tell you exactly what happened on the night. A woman in a canary yellow blazer stood in my driveway at 11:15 p.m., screaming into her phone that there was a dangerous unauthorized vehicle on HOA-controlled property, demanding immediate police response, while I watched her from my front porch, holding a cup of black coffee, wearing the collar brass I hadn't bothered to take off yet from my first day of orientation. She didn't know my name. She didn't know my rank. She didn't know that the 911 dispatcher she was hyperventilating at was patching the call directly to a department whose new chief was standing 8 feet away from her, watching the whole performance with the patience of a man who has diffused situations considerably more dangerous than an agitated woman in a subdivision. She found out, we'll get there, but first let me back up 14 days. My name is Marcus Reeves. I spent 22 years as a law enforcement officer, the last 9 running major crimes investigations for a mid-sized city 2 states over. When my wife passed ovarian cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end, I requested a transfer opportunity and eventually accepted a position as chief of police for Millhaven Township, a small, reasonably quiet municipality carved out of what used to be farmland, about 40 minutes north of the state capital. The job came with a relocation package, a clean title, and a property I'd purchased sight mostly unseen based on satellite imagery, deed documentation, and a video walkthrough my realtor sent me on a Tuesday afternoon. The house sat on 0.84 acres at the end of Crestview Terrace. It had a long gravel driveway, a detached garage that needed work, and a backyard full of old oak trees that reminded me of the place my father grew up. I bought it because I needed something that felt permanent. I bought it because after 14 months of hospitals and hospice care, and a grief so physical it felt like someone had replaced my sternum with wet concrete, I needed somewhere that was mine. I moved in on a Saturday. I had 2 boxes unpacked in my truck, a 10-year-old Ford F-250, dark gray, perfectly registered to my name at this address, parked in my own driveway when the doorbell rang at 4:47 p.m. I remember the time because I just synchronized my security cameras. I have a habit of time-stamping things. It comes from the job. The woman on my porch was somewhere between 55 and 60, with silver-highlighted hair pulled tight enough to look painful, wearing a blazer the color of a school bus caution light. She was holding a clipboard with the aggressive posture of someone who had never once in their life considered that a clipboard was not a weapon. "You must be the new owner," she said, not as a greeting but as an accusation. "I'm Diane Pollard, HOA President, Crestview Estates Community Association." "I'll need to come inside." I held the door at a 6-inch gap. "For what purpose?" Section 4.2 of the community bylaws requires a mandatory safety inspection of all newly occupied units within 48 hours of move-in. It also requires that you provide the association with a master key for emergency access purposes. I looked at her for a moment. I looked at the clipboard. I looked back at her. "No," I said. She blinked. I don't think she heard that word often in that context. "Excuse me. No master key. No entry without a scheduled appointment and written advance notice as required by state tenant and property rights statutes, which apply to homeowners in HOA communities. And no, today does not work for an inspection." Her chin lifted approximately 15 degrees. "Mister, I didn't catch your name." "You didn't give me yours as a question either," I said. "Have a good evening, Ms. Pollard." I began to close the door. "You're making a significant mistake," she said, and her voice had dropped about an octave into something she probably imagined sounded like authority. "The association has tools at its disposal that you do not want directed at your property. I suggest you reconsider." I paused. I looked at her one more time. "Noted," I said, and I closed the door. I heard her heels on my gravel for about 30 seconds, then silence. I picked up my coffee cup, took a sip, and went back to unpacking my kitchen. The first violation notice arrived Monday morning. I know because my HOA portal account, automatically created when I registered with the association as required upon purchase, sent me an email notification at 7:03 a.m. Violation notice, case 2024-891, unauthorized commercial vehicle parked in residential driveway. Fine, $250. Remedy required within 72 hours. My truck, my driveway, my property. I printed the notice, dated it, photographed it, uploaded the photograph to a secure cloud folder I'd labeled CRESTVIEW, and wrote a brief response through the portal documenting that the vehicle in question was a personal use pickup registered to me at this residential address, and not a commercial vehicle under any state or local classification. I attached the registration documentation. By Wednesday, I had 4 more notices. Violation 2020-4892, unapproved exterior modification. I had replaced a broken porch light fixture. Fine, $250. Violation 2020-4893, failure to comply with mandatory safety inspection. Fine, $500. Violation 2020-4894, potential waterline encroachment, advisory notice, further action pending. Violation 2020-4895, vehicle continues in violation. Cumulative fine, $750. I printed every one. I photographed every one. I uploaded every one. I responded to everyone through the portal with appropriate documentation, timestamps, and references to applicable state statute. Then I opened a spreadsheet and began logging everything with the methodical patience of a man who has built criminal cases out of nothing but paperwork and time. On Thursday, a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door at around 2 in the afternoon. He was young, late 20s, broad-shouldered, with the slightly apologetic posture of someone who's been sent to do something they don't fully agree with. His name tag read Deputy Garrett Cole. Mr. Reeves, I'm Deputy Cole, Millhaven County Sheriff's Department. We received a complaint from the Crestview HOA regarding some property disputes. I just want to make sure everything's. Come in, I said. Coffee, he blinked. Sure, yeah, thank you. We sat at my kitchen table. I showed him the violation notices. I showed him my responses. I showed him the vehicle registration, the deed, the survey map of my property lines, and my state bar card identifying me as a registered property rights complainant, something I'd obtained years ago during a different fight. Deputy Cole turned a coffee mug in his hands and looked at the stack of documents for a long moment. Off the record, Mr. Reeves. Entirely, I said. Ms. Pollard has used this department as a messenger service before. She files complaints, we respond, she gets to say she has police attention on her side. He paused. I can tell you that none of what she's filed creates any legal obligation on your part that you haven't already addressed. You're fine, legally. But, I said, he met my eyes, but she plays dirty. She has history here. I document everything, every conversation, every visit, every piece of paper. He stood and picked up his hat. Everything. Already am, I said. He nodded, and something crossed his face that looked almost like relief. The following Monday, I had a surveyor come out and stake my property lines with bright orange markers. Every corner, every boundary, precisely measured and marked with stakes bearing tamper detection wire running to a small alarm unit on my garage wall. If any stake was disturbed, I would know within 60 seconds. I also installed a biometric security panel on my front gate. A secondary gate I had installed at the end of my driveway where my property met the road easement. Custom steel, powder-coated, keyed to a 6-point biometric scan including fingerprint, palm vein, and a 4-digit personal code. The panel was mounted on a concrete footer I poured myself on a Saturday morning while listening to a baseball broadcast. It was, to put it plainly, not passable by anyone who was not me. On Tuesday of that same week, Diane Pollard arrived with a man in a gray van who turned out to be a locksmith from a company 3 towns over. She stood at my gate with her clipboard while he surveyed the biometric panel, and I watched all of this on my front camera feed from my kitchen table. I pressed the intercom button. "Good morning, Ms. Pollard." She looked up at the camera. "The association requires access to the driveway area for a routine utility inspection." "Open the gate. Please submit your biometric scan to register as an authorized visitor," I said. There was a pause. "That is not. The panel accepts fingerprint, palm vein, and a 4-digit PIN. If you'd like to be added as an authorized visitor, I'll need to be present to enroll your credentials. I'm available by appointment, Tuesdays between 2 and 4 p.m. The next available slot is 2 weeks out." The locksmith looked at the panel. He looked at Diane. He looked at the panel again. Then he said something I couldn't hear through the intercom, walked back to his van, and drove away. Diane stood at my gate for another 6 minutes. I drank my coffee. The night I found it, it was nearly 2 in the morning, and I had a legal pad covered in handwritten notes sitting next to a bowl of cold soup I'd forgotten to eat. I had started pulling publicly available HOA documents 2 weeks earlier. Annual budgets, meeting minutes, vendor contracts, anything filed with the county recorder's office. It was the kind of forensic ground floor work I'd done on financial crimes cases. You start with what's visible. You look for the seams where the numbers don't lie flat. The Crestview Estates Community Association had a budget of approximately $340,000 annually, funded by member dues at $2,800 per household per year across their 121 homes. That math worked out to $338,800 in theoretical annual dues revenue, which meant the budget was essentially balanced to within rounding error every year. Normal so far. But I kept looking at the vendor line items. There was a landscaping contract worth $67,000 annually paid to a company called Pinnacle Property Services, LLC. I pulled the LLC registration through the state business portal. Pinnacle Property Services, LLC was registered to a Bradley Pollard. And when I cross-referenced that name against Diane Pollard's publicly available county property records, the address was the same house. Her son, $67,000 a year, paid from homeowner dues to a company owned by her son for landscaping services on common areas that, based on the satellite imagery and my own observations, consisted of about 4 small islands of decorative grass and 2 entrance plantings. I went further. There was a second contract, structural assessment and compliance review, $48,000 annually, paid to Crestview Safety Compliance Group, LLC. That entity's registered agent was a Patricia Dunmore, who I found listed as Diane Pollard's sister-in-law through county marriage records, $115,000 a year, flowing from homeowner accounts, through the HOA's operating budget, directly into companies controlled by Diane Pollard's immediate family. I sat back in my chair for a long moment and looked at the ceiling. Then I opened a new folder on my encrypted drive and labeled it Financial Misconduct Primary. 2 days later, there was a soft knock on my door at around 7 p.m. I opened it to find a small man in his 60s, white-haired, wearing a rain jacket despite the dry weather. He introduced himself as Tom Vasquez. He lived 4 houses down. He was holding a manila envelope. "I heard you've been pushing back," he said quietly. "Against Diane. I've been asserting my rights as a property owner," I said. "Would you like to come in?" He did. We sat. He opened the envelope. Inside were photocopied internal board meeting minutes, not the sanitized public versions, but the actual working notes from closed sessions. Board votes on the vendor contracts. Emails between Diane and Bradley Pollard discussing how to structure the Pinnacle invoices to avoid the threshold for member audit request. A handwritten note in what Tom identified as Diane's handwriting that said, "Reeves parcel, need him out or compliant before Q2 audit review." "How long has this been happening?" I asked. 5 years, Tom said. "Maybe more. People leave, people go compliant. Nobody has ever just," he paused, searching for the word held. "I'm holding," I said. He nodded slowly and left the envelope with me. The following morning, I drove 40 minutes to the office of an attorney named Sandra Elray, who specialized in property rights, HOA litigation, and civil RICO. She was 60, sharp-eyed, and had the energy of someone who genuinely enjoys courtrooms the way other people enjoy vacation. I laid every document on her conference table, the violation notices, my logged responses, the survey stakes, the camera footage of the locksmith incident, Tom's leaked minutes, the vendor contracts, the LLC registrations. She looked at everything for 38 minutes without speaking. Then she looked at me. "Where did you say you worked before?" she said. "Major crimes investigation." 9 years. She smiled slowly, like someone picking up a chess piece. "Okay, let's mirror all of this to my firm's secure server right now. And then we need to talk about next steps, because what you have here is not just an HOA dispute." "No," I agreed. "It isn't." 3 days after my meeting with Sandra Elray, I was locked out of the HOA portal. I attempted to log in at 6:47 a.m. and received an error message. "Account suspended pending administrative review. Contact the association office for reinstatement." I documented the timestamp, screenshotted the message, and forwarded it to Sandra's paralegal. By noon that same day, I had received by certified mail a structural hazard notice claiming that a preliminary assessment had identified potential foundation instability in my detached garage, and ordering me to vacate the structure immediately and provide access within 48 hours for a remediation inspection by, and I want you to read this carefully, Crestview Safety Compliance Group, LLC, Patricia Dunmore's company, the one billing the HOA $48,000 a year for nothing. Sandra filed an emergency objection with the county building department by 3 p.m. The county building inspector, who had no knowledge of any structural complaint filed through his office, confirmed via email within 2 hours that no such hazard designation existed in the county system. I printed the email. I added it to the folder. The following week escalated in a different register. I noticed the vehicle on a Tuesday morning. A dark blue sedan, no readable plates from my camera angle, parked at the far end of the street with a line of sight to my gate. It was there at 7 a.m. when I checked my feeds. It was there at noon. It was gone by 4. It was back the next morning. On Wednesday evening, I walked my property perimeter at dusk as I often did. At the back corner of my lot, where the oak trees thickened near the property line, I found a patch of disturbed ground near my rear boundary stake. The tamper wire was still intact. Nobody had pulled the stake, but the ground around it had been probed. I photographed the disturbance, measured the exact GPS coordinates, and sent the photo to Sandra with a one-line note, escalating. "They're measuring my boundaries." I didn't sleep particularly well that week, but I want to be precise about something. I wasn't afraid. I was focused. There is a difference, and men who have worked crime scenes at 3 in the morning in hostile neighborhoods understand that difference clearly. Then came the board vote. Tom sent me a text message at 8:47 p.m. on a Thursday. "Emergency meeting tonight. Closed session. Something about your property. I pulled up the county parcel records, my deed, and my survey documentation and laid them on the dining table. I charged every camera battery. I verified every server backup. I set 3 different alert triggers on my security system and sat down with fresh coffee and waited. Sandra called at 10:15. "I have a source on the board," she said. "They voted tonight to authorize an emergency abatement action on your garage under the structural hazard notice. They're claiming imminent danger to community safety. They've hired a demolition contractor." "When?" I said. "My source says they moved fast. I'd guess within the week, maybe sooner." "All right," I said. "Marcus," she paused. "Be careful." "I'm always careful," I said. "That's why I'm still here, to be careful." I hung up. I verified my camera angles for the 9th time. I confirmed the loop recording was active and backing up to 3 separate servers simultaneously. Local NAS, encrypted cloud. And a cold storage drive at Sandra's office that her paralegal updated manually every 48 hours. I set my alarm for 5 a.m. and went to sleep without difficulty. The week that followed was a quiet kind of pressure. 2 welfare check visits from a deputy I didn't recognize. A different one each time, clearly sent from a complaint rather than genuine concern. Both times I answered the door, confirmed I was fine, and asked the deputy to document that I'd indicated no distress. Both times I filed a note in my log. I kept watching the blue sedan. I kept backing up the footage. And then on a Friday night, 9 days after the board vote, I heard the generators. 9:08 p.m. I was at my desk, reviewing Sandra's latest filing when my perimeter camera alert triggered. Not the boundary stake sensor, but the wide-angle camera at the top of my garage, aimed at the road approach. I switched to the feed on my laptop. 3 vehicles had pulled to the end of my street. A flatbed truck with equipment I identified from my camera's enhanced view as an industrial grinder, and at least 1 gas-powered cutting tool in a red case. 2 dark SUVs. A white pickup with a logo I couldn't immediately read, and a canary yellow Blazer stepping out of one of the SUVs. I looked at the time. 9:09 p.m. I picked up my phone and made 3 calls. The first was to Sandra, who answered immediately and said simply, "I'm recording this call." The second was to Deputy Cole, whose personal cell I'd obtained through proper channels after our kitchen table conversation. He answered on the second ring and said, "Where?" I gave him the address and said, "They're here." The third call was to a number I hadn't dialed from this address yet, but which was programmed in my contacts under dispatch, MILLHAVENPD. Because I had, 10 days earlier, officially begun my role as Chief of Police for Millhaven Township. My orientation period was complete. My commission was active. My badge was in my breast pocket because I hadn't emptied my jacket yet from the day's work. "This is Chief Reeves," I said. "I need units at my residential address, Crestview Terrace, immediately." "Active situation." I gave the exact address. "I also need you to contact Millhaven County Sheriff for coordinated response. Reference property rights incident, potential criminal conduct in progress." I put my phone in my pocket. I walked to my front window and watched the flatbed begin to unload. Then I put on my jacket, and I walked out onto my front porch. The air was cool, mid-50s, with a slight wind from the northwest. My gravel driveway crunched faintly under the pressure of my boots as I stepped off the porch and moved to the inside of my gate. The floodlights on my garage triggered on motion and bathed the driveway in clean white light. Every camera was rolling. Diane Pollard was standing at my gate with a man in a contractor's jacket and 2 other men behind him. The contractor was holding a bolt cutter in one hand and had the practiced blank-faced look of someone who does ugly work for enough money. "Mr. Reeves," Diane said. Her voice was clipped and certain, the voice of someone who had rehearsed this moment. The association is exercising its right of emergency abatement under Section 11.7 of the Community CC and RS. You have failed to comply with the structural hazard notice. We are authorized to— Ms. Pollard, I said from behind my gate clearly, at a volume my microphones would capture cleanly. What you are describing is trespassing and destruction of private property. The structure in question has been confirmed by Millhaven County Building and Code Enforcement to carry no outstanding hazard designation. I have that confirmation in writing, dated and time-stamped. You do not have authority here. The contractor looked at the biometric gate panel. He looked at the bolt cutter in his hand. He looked at the gate, which was solid steel set in concrete footers, and which a bolt cutter was not going to open in any scenario involving his continued employment or freedom. "Cut it," Diane said. He didn't move. "I said cut the— Lady," the contractor said quietly. "That's a biometric security installation on a residential private property. If I touch that with this," he lifted the bolt cutter, "that's criminal damage to property and I lose my license." He took one step back. "I didn't agree to this." Diane wheeled on him. I watched her face go through several colors, and that is the exact moment the sirens started. They came from two directions simultaneously, south on Crestview Terrace and from the main avenue to the north. Blue and white light pulsed across the oak trees and turned the whole street into something that looked like a fever dream. 2 county sheriff units swung in from the south. 3 Millhaven PD units, my units, came from the north. Behind the cruisers, I could see headlights from personal vehicles, and as my eyes adjusted, I recognized Tom Vasquez's old Subaru. And behind it, 4 or 5 other cars whose owners had apparently been watching the street tonight. People on phones, people filming. Deputy Cole stepped out of the lead sheriff vehicle. He surveyed the scene, the flatbed, the equipment, the contractor still holding his bolt cutter. Diane in her yellow blazer, with the calm expression of a man whose instinct for the moment had been validated completely. He walked to me, he looked at my jacket collar, he looked at my badge, he looked at my face. "Chief Reeves," he said. "Deputy Cole," I said. "Ma'am," he said, turning to Diane Pollard with a professional evenness that was somehow more cutting than anger. "I need you to put your hands where I can see them and step toward me." "Please, I am exercising lawful HOA authority under," she started. "Ma'am," his voice stayed flat, "hands now." "Step toward me." One of my officers had already approached the contractor, who handed over the bolt cutter with the relief of a man who has just been given a legal reason to stop doing something he already regretted. The 2 men behind him, associates, whatever their role was tonight, were both asked to remain where they were. Diane Pollard was not handcuffed at that moment, but she was detained, separated, and walked to the side of a cruiser where she stood in the floodlight of my garage cameras, in her canary yellow blazer, while her phone rang in her purse, and she was not permitted to answer it. She looked at me once across the driveway. I looked back at her from my front porch, holding my coffee, which I had picked up on the way out. Then my dispatch officer's voice came through on the radio. One of my officers held toward me. "Chief, for the record, we have the caller's original 911 complaint logged from 17 minutes ago. The complainant reported an unauthorized vehicle in a driveway on Crestview Terrace. Caller identified as Diane Pollard." "Copy that," I said. "Property record for that address shows the registered owner as Marcus J. Reeves." A pause. "That be you, sir?" "That would be me," I said. Across the driveway, in the white light, Diane Pollard's face went through an evolution I will not attempt to describe in words, because words would underserve it. The emergency county hearing was scheduled 9 days after the incident on my driveway. Sandra had pushed for speed, and the judge, a Millhaven County Circuit Court judge named Honorable Patricia Whelan, who had the demeanor of a woman who had seen every variety of human foolishness and remained unimpressed by all of it, had agreed. Diane Pollard arrived with a lawyer named Gerald Cass, who wore a suit that cost more than my monthly truck payment, and who had the practiced confidence of someone accustomed to winning in small civil venues through procedural attrition. He filed 3 pre-hearing motions in the first 6 minutes, one to suppress video evidence on grounds of allegedly improper recording consent, one to dismiss the trespass complaint on grounds of HOA authority, one to delay the hearing pending a full review of the association's CC and RS. Judge Whelan denied all 3 before Cass had fully retaken his seat. "We're proceeding," she said, in a voice that suggested this was not a statement that invited discussion. Sandra presented in 3 phases. Phase 1, the driveway incident. She played the full, unedited recording from my gate camera with audio beginning at 9:08 p.m. She played the intercom recording of Diane ordering the contractor to cut the gate. She entered into the record the contractor's signed statement, obtained by the county DA's investigator, in which he stated that he had been hired to perform an emergency entry and had been told the property was an HOA common area, a statement which, as Sandra noted, was demonstrably false based on the county deed. She presented the county building department email confirming no structural hazard designation. She presented the original hazard notice from Crestview Safety Compliance Group, LLC. She presented the LLC registration, linking that company to Patricia Dunmore. The structural hazard notice, Sandra said, was fabricated by a company whose sole shareholder is the sister-in-law of the HOA president, for the purpose of manufacturing a legal pretext to destroy a private residential structure on a property whose owner had refused to comply with unlawful intrusion demands. She paused. "That is not a safety program, that is a conspiracy." Gerald Cass objected 4 times during that presentation. He was overruled 4 times. Phase 2, the financial structure. Sandra placed the Pinnacle Property Services LLC documentation in the record, Bradley Pollard's name, the $67,000 annual contract, the satellite imagery of the landscaped common areas that the contract purported to service. She placed an affidavit from a licensed landscaping contractor, a legitimate one, estimating fair market value for those services at approximately $12,000 annually. She placed the Crestview Safety Compliance Group contract in the record, the $48,000 annual fee, an affidavit from a licensed structural engineer estimating fair market value for equivalent services at between $8,000 and $14,000, depending on scope. She placed Tom Vasquez's leaked board minutes in the record, authenticated through his sworn affidavit. She highlighted the email exchange about structuring invoices to avoid audit thresholds. She placed the handwritten note, "Reeves parcel, need him out or compliant before Q2 audit review," under the document camera. Judge Whelan's expression, which had already been the expression of a person reading something they find distasteful, shifted into something considerably more serious. Gerald Cass stood up. "Your Honor, I'd like to address the provenance of these internal documents." "Sit down, Mr. Cass," the judge said, without looking up from the documents. He sat. Phase 3, the pattern. Sandra presented records of 7 other homeowners in Crestview Estates who had received escalating fines and violation notices within the past 3 years, 4 of whom had sold their homes within 12 months of the campaign beginning. She presented the correlation between those departures and subsequent HOA board decisions to reclassify those sold properties into higher assessment tiers. "A pattern," Sandra said, "of targeted harassment designed to drive out homeowners who resisted association authority, consolidating financial leverage over remaining members, and enriching the president and her associates through fraudulent vendor contracts. This is not a neighborhood dispute. This is racketeering. The room was very quiet. Judge Wellen looked at Diane Pollard for a long moment. Diane had not moved from her seat. Her lawyer was writing something furiously on a legal pad that I suspected was mostly not helpful. I'm ordering an immediate forensic audit of the Crestview Estates Community Association's financial records for the past 7 years, Judge Wellen said. All accounts associated with the association are frozen pending that audit. I'm issuing a civil judgment against Ms. Pollard personally for the trespass incident at Mr. Reeves's property, with damages to be determined. And I am referring this matter to the county district attorney for criminal investigation of fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and civil RICO. She set down her pen. I want to say something for the record, she added. HOA boards serve at the pleasure and in the interest of their member communities. They are not private governments. They do not have police authority. They do not have the right to destroy private property, manufacture false safety claims, or weaponize municipal emergency services for personal vendettas. She looked at Diane Pollard one more time. This court is done with you for today. The district attorney is not. The gavel came down. I sat in my chair and did not move for several seconds. Sandra placed her hand briefly on my arm. I looked at the courtroom's pale fluorescent light, reflecting off the oak-paneled walls, and felt something that wasn't quite satisfaction, but was adjacent to it. The feeling of watching the mechanism of justice, which is slow and imperfect and maddening in its grinding pace, finally catch something real in its teeth. The criminal indictments came down 43 days later. 3 counts of wire fraud against Diane Pollard personally. 2 counts of conspiracy for Bradley Pollard. 1 count each of fraud and fiduciary misconduct against 2 additional board members who had knowingly participated in the vendor scheme. The DA's office also filed a civil RICO complaint. Crestview Safety Compliance Group, LLC was dissolved by court order. Pinnacle Property Services, LLC had its business license suspended pending the criminal proceedings. The forensic audit found $340,000 in misdirected funds over 6 years. Money paid from the dues of 121 families for landscaping work that wasn't done, inspections that weren't real, and compliance reviews that existed only as line items on fraudulent invoices. The HOA board, stripped of its entire leadership and under court supervision, voted to dissolve and reconstitute with a new elected membership. Tom Vasquez called me the night the indictments were announced. He didn't say much. He said, "Thank you," that was it. I told him he'd done the brave part by showing up with the envelope, and he made a sound somewhere between a laugh and something more complicated. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning with thin November sunlight cutting through the oak trees, 6 of my neighbors gathered at the entrance to Crestview Terrace. Someone had brought a stepladder. Someone else had brought a socket wrench set. The gilded bronze sign at the subdivision entrance, CRESTVIW ESTATES Community Association, Excellence in Community Standards, came down bolt by bolt. With Tom Vasquez holding the ladder, and a woman named Renata from 2 streets over catching each piece as it came loose. Nobody cheered. It wasn't that kind of moment. People just stood there in the quiet of the morning with their breath fogging slightly in the cold air, watching the thing come down. I drove home and stood at the end of my driveway. I looked at my truck, parked in my own gravel driveway where it had been parked since the day I moved in. I looked at my biometric gate, which I had never had cause to regret installing. I looked at my survey stakes with their little orange flags standing clean and straight at my property corners. Then I unlocked my gate, walked to my front door, and installed a new deadbolt. Simple, heavy, American-made. I set the key on my kitchen counter and stood there for a moment in the silence of my house, which smelled like wood and coffee and the first winter coming in at the window frames. I thought about my wife, who would have found this entire story both infuriating and enormously satisfying in roughly equal measure. I thought about what it means to hold ground, not with anger, not with performance, with documentation and patience and the firm, quiet knowledge that the law, imperfect, grinding, maddeningly slow, eventually catches things in its teeth. You don't have to be a police chief for any of this to apply to you. You just have to refuse to let anyone tell you that your home is not your home. If you've ever stood your ground against a system designed to wear you down, if you've ever said no to someone who expected a yes, and watched them not know what to do next, type yes in the comments right now. And if you want more stories about real people holding the line against the ones who think rules only apply to everyone else, hit subscribe. Because I'm not done, not even close.